Thank you very much. Good morning. Well, looking out at this audience, I can't help reflecting on what a bizarre, unexpected turn my life has taken in recent years. What am I doing here? I'm in a lecture theatre in London, addressing an audience of people who, until very recently, were complete strangers to me and complete strangers to each other. Some of you I have already met through Twitter, and some of you I hope I will meet in the rest of today. And I find Twitter, and I've already said this to several people I've spoken to this morning, it's a remarkably accurate filter, isn't it, of people. But it's great to meet you all in the flesh, and if you haven't spoken to me, do please come and say hello later on in the day. So, my talk is about diabetes. Is it something or is it nothing? Well, what am I doing here today? I am, as the title says, talking about diabetes. 5 years ago, only 5 years ago, talking about diabetes was the one thing I didn't do, unless it was strictly necessary. You're not going to get some deep-seated psychological tale of trauma. I wasn't in denial, I wasn't in distress, I wasn't in burnout, anything like that. I was actually just too busy. I had better things to do. I couldn't be bothered with diabetes, if the truth be told. I had developed this pesky but perfectly manageable condition at the age of 40, precisely 40, when I was in the prime of a very busy career as a school teacher, fully involved in the life of a growing family of 3 children, and the life of the community in which we lived. You're going to see some funny pictures. This is me. It's quite hard finding pictures from the pre-digital era. I couldn't find many, but I came across this sort of truly bizarre one. No, I didn't used to be a monk, but actually that's a picture that was taken for a local newspaper. And it was of me pretending to be a monk, and I was dressed in medieval costume to celebrate the town where I live had a 700th anniversary of their royal charter, and we organised a medieval festival to commemorate that. And I was one of the organisers of that event. So that was, yes, it was in the summer of 1996, same time as Euro 96, I remember it well. And there I am with my wife and my 3 children. They're all now adults. And I was a conspicuously healthy adult on the brink of middle age. I'd had a couple of childhood illnesses. I'd broken an arm, more of that later, when I was about 13, but really that was it. And then diabetes struck. It struck me with almost no warning in the last months of 1997, a few weeks after my 40th birthday. And whilst it was a shock suddenly to find myself as a vulnerable patient with some complex needs and a lengthy repeat prescription list and a lot to learn, I didn't want it to interfere with my life and work in any way, shape or form, and I didn't. My diagnosis is a story which I imagine a number of you have actually read on social media, so apologies if you're hearing this story that you already know, but I'll just do a quick synopsis of it. I had a bad case of flu. It was just before the 1997 Christmas break from school. It was a week's absence from work. It was almost literally the first time I'd ever missed any time off work. And incidentally, I went through an entire secondary school career without ever missing a day. That was what I was like, so I wasn't used to it. But there was no real cause for alarm. There was one of those bad flu epidemics around, and lots of colleagues were off sick, so I just thought it was all part of that. But then it had literally got to the last day of term. I hadn't gone back to school. I was just sort of getting better. And then suddenly the condition took a nosedive, and I went to see my GP. I was alarmed at the apparent recurrence of a severe illness from which I thought I was just recovering. I was tired, thirsty, and run down, but I thought that was just, well, a hangover from a bad case of the flu. However, she did a urine test, and it revealed very high blood sugar. And the alarm GP, who incidentally was a parent of 3 children whom I was teaching at the time, informed me she was pretty sure it was diabetes, which I'd barely heard of. and referred me to her colleague at the practice who was a specialist in the condition. Her colleague, stepfather of another pupil at my school, such is the Venn diagram of life in a small town in the north of England, he told me to, quote, cut out sugary foods and see if the blood sugar level fell. This puzzled me somewhat because I've always had a famously unsweet tooth. I don't really like cakes and sweets and stuff like that. But I agreed to do what he said. Came back a few days later, and this was literally a couple of days before Christmas, to discover that my sugar level was higher than ever. Okay, he said, let's try medication. He was assuming from my age that I was type 2. Looking back, I have to say this was a highly questionable diagnosis in the face of all evidence. I was slim, ate healthily, exercised plenty, but again, I went along with it because I didn't know any better. Took the pills for a few days, including Christmas Day, and remember this was pre-internet, pre-Dr. Google, so I knew next to nothing about diabetes. I certainly wasn't even aware of there being two types. And it was then when I reported back after Christmas with an even higher blood sugar level and no sign of feeling better, that he finally speculated that it might actually be type 1 and told me that this was, quote, exceptionally rare at my age. Off to hospital I went, only as an outpatient, where a consultant confirmed it indeed was type 1, and off we go. I did all this without missing a single extra day off work, despite feeling very tired. And of course, and everyone in this room will recognise that, once the insulin started to have an effect, and that's almost instant, isn't it, I was soon back to normal. Now, I wasn't trying to be stoical or heroic. It's just the way I am. I don't like making a fuss. It's a lifelong, and my family tell me slightly annoying habit, which was already in me as a toddler. My late mother used to tell a tale of me at the age of about 2 or 3, getting trapped under a fully loaded clothes horse, which she had seen fall over without realising that her child was under it. She was busy doing something else at the time, so she just finished what she was doing before even attempting to pick it up. Only then did she discover that her precious toddler was actually lying under it, trapped by its weight, but not injured. Apparently, I said in so many words that I was fine and thought she was a bit busy, so I didn't want to bother her. When I was 13, I fell off my bike and broke my arm, but failed to tell anyone for about a week until... There you are. Look at that. Yes, that is me. Until my, bless her, my nearly blind grandmother, she's there with a white stick, she couldn't see anything, but she looked at my arm and said to my mother, that child's arm is broken. Yeah, that picture was actually taken just after I'd had the plaster off. But there we go. So yes, I didn't like making a fuss. And likewise as an adult, I didn't want to make a fuss about diabetes. I learned to inject, to test, and just went back to work. 3 months after diagnosis, I led a group of 40 kids and 5 teachers on a residential school trip to France, which is what I did every year in those days. And I certainly didn't want to, quote, talk about diabetes, which is why it's weird that I'm even here today. I didn't know anyone else with the condition, and I didn't go out of my way to meet anyone else with it. In fact, just about the only fellow type 1 diabetic I met in my first 16 years, would you believe, 16 years, was when a pupil joined my school, having just developed type 1 at the age of 10. I was more than happy to meet her and her mum and offer the reassurance of being a teacher in the school who knew what the condition was all about. I never actually taught the girl, but I used to see her around the place for a friendly word. I used to share biscuits and jelly babies with her when she was caught short after a games lesson. And occasionally I'd stand in when the school nurse wasn't free to supervise her injections. But my involvement went no further than that. Until a little blue bird came into my life. Now, I was relatively late to social media. despite being... Oh, he's going to say something. What's he going to say? Oh, there we go. A few hashtags that might be familiar to you. The last three, as many of you will know, I invented. Better than having a life. I was actually relatively late to social media, despite being a very early internet enthusiast. And as many of you know, and some of you bully me about, I still haven't joined Facebook. I remain very unconvinced by it, although I'm open to persuasion. Twitter, however, appealed to me because of the conciseness of saying something worthwhile in 140 characters. But perhaps more importantly, the chance to follow and occasionally interact with people I didn't know, rather than just seeing the minutiae of lives of people who I used to know or already know. I started out on Twitter as a follower rather than as a person seeking followers. I had no idea there was going to be any connection with diabetes, and I certainly had no wish or intention of using it as a means to communicate with others. I actually quite like, and I'm sorry if this offends anyone who's a Facebook user, which is most of you, but I actually think that's quite a good summary of the difference between the two social media platforms. I think that's quite clever. I saw it on Twitter a few weeks ago and thought, yeah, quite like that. Anyway, at some point, as I was getting to know how hashtags work, I must have tried looking at the word hashtag diabetes, and I started to come across the wonderful world of the GB Doc, the online community. Now, at first, I was what we call a lurker. The author of that picture is in the audience here today, more of her later. I was a Twitter lurker, someone who watches, likes, but actually doesn't say anything. I'm a bit like that in real life. I prefer to feel my way into any group rather than speaking too soon. So my behavior in the online world was guided by that principle. Eventually, however, when I got the feel of what people say, I started to chip in. Now, when I was starting to think about what I was going to say today, I checked my Twitter archive. Did you know you can do that? Did you know you can request it? You can get it as a massive Excel spreadsheet. It's quite fun. You need to go on the PC version. It's somewhere way down at the bottom of the settings, but it's another way of wasting a few hours of your life. And I actually did a search to find out when I first had a conversation to do with diabetes. And I found out that it was indeed on November the 28th, 2013, that I first had a conversation with someone else with diabetes. And that someone was the already established blogger and tweeter. And she's here today. My very first dia-buddy, Ellie Huckle. I think it's very appropriate that she's here today, and I met her for a coffee before we started. But she was literally the first person I had any conversation relating to diabetes with. And yeah, 2013, so not that long ago, is it? These days, and I suspect many of you probably know this, I'm a bit of a Twitterholic. And many of those of you whom I follow or who follow me are indeed people with diabetes, including, of course, many of you in this audience. But if you do follow me, I hope you recognise that I try to avoid too much talking about diabetes. I prefer to talk about cats or chickens or Bolton Wanderers or whatever. Oh, yeah, there we are. I suspect some of you recognise that lot. There is some kind of connection between cats and diabetes. I think it's worthy of some research. But yeah, when I have nothing better to do with my life, I just compile pictures, and every one of those cats belongs to a person with diabetes. And some of you may even be recognising your own cat there. One of them, somewhere, not sure where he is, one of them is actually a cat with diabetes, who lives in our local garden centre at the Preston branch of Dobbies. They have a pet cat who has diabetes, and yeah, I think he's probably got hidden behind the thing. She's called Peggy. However, I am wary of talking too much about diabetes. I don't want to become, sorry, I love the dia prefix. I don't want to become a diabore who just talks diabolics. I have a short attention span, a diversive brain, so I try to reflect that in my tweeting and blogging. but I have certainly morphed into somebody who's more than happy to talk about diabetes. So is it worth it? Is it worth talking about diabetes? Is it something or is it nothing? Well, let's see. I don't think anybody here needs reminding that diabetes really is quite something. You'll hear that from every speaker today. It's a big deal in our lives. It's with us 24/7, 365, 365, for life. We can never forget it for more than a few minutes. It is, as they say, a monkey on your back. Where's he gone? There he is. Or actually, to be more accurate, it's a whole troop of monkeys on your back. I recently attended a training event for teachers about supporting children with diabetes. In a way, a bit of a pointless thing for me to go to, but I had to go. And although most of the content had me quietly snoozing, I was actually very struck by one statistic which the presenter, who was a diabetes specialist nurse, presented. And she said that a child with type 1 diabetes has, on average, 27 extra thought processes before they even get to school each day. 27 thought processes. So I started trying to work out what those 27 might be. So 27 little thought bubbles will appear around our little friend there. All things that they might be thinking about before they get to school. Now, I think that's quite significant, isn't it? 27 processes. I guess it might well be true. And if so, how many extra thought processes do we, all of us, have in a typical day? And perhaps more importantly, at what price is that to the rest of our lives? Even while you're sitting here in the audience, even while I was sitting here waiting to speak, you're actually checking stuff, you're worrying. There's a picture that's already appeared on Twitter of me eating jelly babies before I started, because I thought it would be quite entertaining to go hypo whilst talking, but I didn't really want to do that. Have we got 27 now? If you can be bothered, count them. There are 27 there, and I don't think I repeated any of them. Yeah, so it isn't easy, is it? Living by numbers, one of my favourite diabetes songs, and in that sense, diabetes really is quite something. And for me personally, of course, it's become even more of a thing since I started taking an interest in it. Thinking back to 2013 and those first tentative steps on Twitter, it's remarkable that I now have what is in effect a second life thanks to diabetes and Twitter. I've been styled as an unofficial Mr. Freestyle Libre thanks to my online enthusiasm, some would say over-enthusiasm, for Abbott's flash glucose monitoring system. And they even made a film about me. Oh, sorry, no, that picture crops up all over the place. People keep tweeting me at conferences and saying it's appeared. I think it's because Diabetes UK have got it and use it. And then, yeah, so, and there's me and my Libre enthusiasm. Sorry, I got a few slides behind there. This was them making a film of me about it. This really did scare the neighbours. That was about 6 o'clock in the morning outside my house. And you can see me standing there. I was actually trying to get to work. It was on A-level results day. Some of you may have seen the film, actually. It was on A-level results day when people like me try and get to school at the crack of dawn. But they had to do about 6 takes of me cycling just the first 50 yards from my house. Not because of anything I was doing wrong. I just didn't like the light or something like that. But I don't know. It looks sort of really dramatic, that. It's, yeah. So, yeah. No, I do worry that I perhaps overdo the Libre enthusiasm, but I honestly have found it awesomely helpful. Years before Libre was invented, I remember my wife saying to me that what you really need is a device that'll tell you not what your blood glucose is, but where it's going to. And I think for me that really is what makes it a winner of above all else. So, thanks to diabetes and my Libre enthusiasm, I've opened up, as I say, a whole new life. I visited Sweden last year for a conference with fellow diabetics from all over Europe, and I'm due to lead a training session for Abbott at their labs in Whitney this summer. And I've made, and loads of them are here today, and it's great to see you, I've made literally hundreds of new friends. Diabuddies, as I like to call them. People whose paths would never have crossed mine were it not for the condition that we all share. Some of you will recognise these pictures or maybe even recognise yourself on them. They are my real life encounters with people with diabetes from recent years. One more, I think. There we go. The bottom one was in Sweden about this time last year. And of course, in getting to know all those people, I've gained insights not only into my own condition, but also into the lives of those who, unlike me, live with a whole lot more besides diabetes. Adolescence, hormones, pregnancy, parenthood, depression, chronic fatigue, sight loss, Addison's, Asperger's, anxiety, much more besides. These are my dire heroes, and indeed, for that, to me, they really are proof that diabetes is quite something. And yet, in many ways, it's nothing. I was recently asked by a Twitter friend in Australia. There you go. Isn't that wonderful, the community that you get to know people on the other side of the world? She's the mother of a teenager with type 1. A lot of you will know her. She calls herself type 1 mum. She's called Maureen. And she asked me to contribute a letter of hope for a project she was setting up in Australia for newly diagnosed young people and their families. She reckoned there was too much negativity in what she and her son get out there from healthcare professionals. I enjoyed doing that task because it tapped into my instinctive positivity. I came up with 12 points about living with diabetes which show that it is no big problem and at best an actual bonus. Here they are. It won't kill you. Can I have some more, please? It won't even make you feel ill a lot of the time. Not quite true, but fair enough. It won't stop you doing anything. We all know that. You can eat whatever you want. I bet there's been a lot of Easter eggs consumed by people in this room over the last week, despite the fact that people always come and see me and say, "Oh, I'll not give you an Easter egg because you can't eat it." You say, "Yes, I can." Better still, you can refuse what you don't like. Have we all done that? I do that all the time. Nobody ever argues. And of course you get free prescriptions. Well, yeah, fair enough. That's the least we deserve. 6 more, I think. You get regular health checks for life, potentially ending up healthier. We couldn't go for long without something being discovered because we're always being checked. You get some really cool techie stuff to play with. Pumps, meters, stuff like that. I think a lot of us secretly quite enjoy messing about with those. I do anyway. You can eat sweets like I was doing down here before this talk started, claiming it's a medical necessity. It often is. Anyone ever done that? I've done that loads of times. You just fed up, so you just say, "Oh, sorry, blood sugar's a bit low," and everyone looks terribly worried. If you're a kid at school, you get to jump to the front of the lunch queue. But perhaps above all, and I think that's the best one to have as the last and most important, is you'll meet some awesome and lovely people. You guys, your fellow diabetics. I'm sure you'll all recognize many of those. 12 reasons why diabetes really is nothing. Certainly nothing to worry about. I genuinely think that the past 19 years with diabetes, and especially these last 5, have not only failed to stop me from doing anything, but have actually enriched my life and made me a more interesting, or dare I say more interested, person. And compared to the contacts and positives that have come from my life with diabetes, the condition is, well, really nothing. So, is it something or nothing? We need a conclusion, don't we? Well, I'm a Libre-wearing Libra. If you know anything about Librans, we're supposed to be annoyingly balanced. We always see both sides of the argument. So do you know what? I'm actually going to chicken out of an answer. Is diabetes something or nothing? Well, for me, it's both. It's really just something and nothing. Diabetes, for me, it's something and nothing. Thank you very much.